Welcome to this week's edition of Mob Talk. I'm Dave Stratweiser.
And I'm George Anastasia with the Philadelphia Inquirer.
George, we're not going to leave the month of March without noting another historical date on the mob scene here in South Philadelphia. It was a attempted mob hit caught on tape by the FBI.
March 2nd, 1993, in the city of brotherly love, brother against brother.
George, set the stage for me here. The FBI has a camera mounted in a house across the street from the Warfield Diner off of Grace Ferry Ave over there.
Right.
And what do they see on that evening?
Well, this is Joe Ciangalini's place, and it's shortly before 6 a.m. in the morning. And first they see Joe Ciangalini and a waitress, Susan Lucibello, arriving. And they open the grates and they start to open the store. And it's still dark. And there's lighting in the luncheonette, and two cars drive by. And then all of a sudden, in addition to the video, there's also a bug inside the luncheonette. And now you see shadows. Four individuals run in. Susan Lucibello screams. You hear footfalls. They go into the back room. You hear gunshots. And then you see them run back out again. It's probably the only mob hit in history that's ever videotaped and audio taped. Not good enough that you could identify the shooters, but certainly a very dramatic shooting.
Okay, and who, from court testimony, we heard from Tommy Scafidi on this, who says he was there when this happened, former mobster, government informant, Tommy Scafidi, horsehead, as we call him.
Yeah.
And he identifies in court during the last Joey Merlino trial who the shooters were.
Yeah, and here's the problem with that. He says, one, he was there, he was one of the shooters, and no one has ever been convicted of that because that ended up a not proven allegation in the racketeering case. But among the individuals I think he identifies, and correct me if I'm wrong, it was George Borghese, Lancelotti.
Michael
Lancelotti. Merlino was supposedly driving a backup car that day, and there was one other shooter involved in the actual shooting. And they were all charged, but never convicted. So, we've got allegations of how this one all went down. It certainly did go down. We see it go down. But in terms of anybody being held accountable, it's never happened.
All right. Now, in the days after that, let's talk about beforehand. What brought this shooting, from what we know?
Well, I mean, this is kind of what set the war between the Stanford faction and the Merlino faction into high gear. A year before, almost to the day, I think it was March the 3rd. March the 3rd, 1992. Mike Ciangalini, who is Joe Merlino's top associate, is coming back from playing basketball, and he sees two guys following him, I think, in a car. He realizes he's got a problem. He starts to run. They jump out of the car with shotguns, chase him up the street. He gets into his house, and they open fire, and they kind of shoot the front of his house up.
Strafe the place, right?
Strafe his house. And this is almost a year to the day before this shooting. And according to Scafidi's testimony, Mike Ciangalini believed his brother Joe was involved in that particular shooting.
So this is payback.
Yeah, and you got a situation of brother against brother. This is at a point where Stanford is trying to take control of the crime family in Philly. He's got a problem with the younger guys, the Merlinos and the Mikey Changs, and he makes Joe Ciangalini his underboss, apparently to try to bridge that gap, and it doesn't work. Now, the Ciangalini family is interesting in terms of the soap opera that is the Philadelphia Mob. Their father, Joe Chicky Ciangalini, is in jail on a racketeering charge. At that point, the older brother, John, is in jail for an extortion stint that he's doing. And you've got two brothers out on the streets, Joey Chang and Mikey Chang, and each is aligned with a different faction.
Yeah, and to hear Tommy Scafidi tell it, when we talked to him, did an interview with him a few years ago, he was told the day they showed up to do that shooting, they were like talking it over, well, maybe we shouldn't do this today. And according to him, Michael Chang said to him, you're doing this today or I'm going to shoot you.
Yeah, that was an open court under oath. That's what he said. If you don't do this, I'm going to kill you. And so, it got carried out, and it was so indicative of what was going on in the underworld at that point. You had two factions shooting one another, a brazen hit, and you had a brother against a brother. It just undermined everything that this organization is supposed to be about. Honor and loyalty and all that kind of stuff. It's just all by the board.
And this threw more gasoline on the fire between Stanford and Merlino. Michael Ciangalini ended up dead like a year later, shot.
Yeah,
and Joey shot.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, one of the things that happened, the testimony in that racketeering trial was, after this went down, according to, again, Tommy Horsehead, the shooters thought that Stanford and Joey Chang were going to be there, and they were going to pop both of them. And when it didn't go down that way, and when Joey Chang survived this horrendous shooting, he's never been the same, but he survived, they had to kind of cover their tracks, and then they went to Stanford and said, we'll find out who did it. But eventually, I think Stanford realized where this had come from, and in August of '93 is when Joe Merlino and Mikey Chang were gunned down and Mikey Chang was killed. It all flowed out of that.
Okay. Why did this case fall apart in court? Why do you think the jury didn't believe that? Did they not believe Scafidi? It was too big of a jump for them to figure that out? What do you think?
I think part of it was that you had conflicting testimony. I think Ralph Natale told a somewhat different version of how that hit went down and who was involved. So you had two different informants putting different people at the scene, right. And I think the jury wasn't comfortable enough with identifying or convicting anybody given the varying identities that were put out to them.
And Natale was the boss, at least in name, so maybe the jury gave a little more weight to what he was saying, or that created the conflict.
I think what it did was Natale and Scafidi undermined each other's credibility because they didn't tell the same story. And then you have a tape that doesn't really, it's a fascinating tape, a dramatic tape, but it doesn't give you anything. Yes. It just gives you shadows.
George, we haven't visited the drug world in a little bit. Next week we will. Interesting case in federal court. A suspect on trial for allegedly ordering a hit on a government informant in a big drug case.
Yeah, drug kingpin, alleged kingpin Maurice Phillips, the victim Shanette Glanville, who was allegedly a money launderer, and this is another example of witness intimidation in the drug underworld.
Okay, that's it for Mob Talk this week. We'll see you next week.